I'm Jason Sylvia, and this is the Creative Capital Show. A show about creative people and how those creative people turn into entrepreneurs by taking their creativity and turning it into a business and facing all the trials and tribulations along the way. There's the term a Jack or Jill of all trades. After making this episode, the term should be changed to a Lois of all trades, in honor of this episode's guest, Lois Harada. Artist, printmaker, activist, teacher, board member, city commissioner, chairperson are just some of the titles Lois has held in her career. In this episode, Lois and I talk about what makes the Providence creative community unique, how one of her first residencies was the length of a cup of coffee, the importance of access to art programs and education, how art in the public space can enrich a community, using unconventional methods such as a penny press and an airplane banner for her creative projects, designing a basketball court, and using art as a form of activism, and a whole lot more. Enjoy. All right, so Lois Harada, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jason. I'm really excited to be here.
Appreciate it. I think maybe the first thing we start off with, if there's for some reason somebody in the local Providence area, or hopefully there's somebody who's outside of Providence listening to this, I really hope so, who doesn't know who you are or didn't bother to read the title card of the episode, and they just had it on autoplay and it played the newest one because they love the show so much. Who are you and what do you do? What is your specialty?
Sure. So I am an artist and printmaker, and I'm based in Providence. So a lot of my work incorporates letterpress printing because my day job is working at DWRI Letterpress, which is a commercial print shop.
So I think it's, interesting that we're starting off with you're an artist based out of Providence, but to my knowledge, and I try to do some decent research on the show, when I get into the questions, you weren't born and raised in Providence. You came to Providence by way of Salt Lake City?
That's correct. Yeah, I'm from a town called Kaysville, which is a little north of Salt Lake City. When you're from somewhere that's a small town, you kind of round up to the next biggest city. And I came to Rhode Island to study at RISD, and I studied printmaking there. I got really lucky in high school and had a teacher that really loved printmaking and had a lot of equipment. So coming into RISD, I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to study, and then I just stayed after graduation.
So that having a clear idea of what you wanted to study, so that was happening in high school. Were you always into art and specifically like print style of art since you were a little kid, or how did that formulate?
Yeah, I think so. And I think maybe for me, I'm always really interested in craft-based things. So using my hands, my mom is a quilter and a great sewer. And so we always kind of were watching her make things. And so I think that appreciation of making things by hand is really what got me interested in printmaking, because it's such a technical process and there are so many steps, and the technique is really sort of what hooked me.
So, working with your hands, technique, the craft basically that is involved with that style of artwork over others is what really got you into it then.
Yeah, definitely.
So you're working on that through high school. You have a guidance counselor that says, hey, you should take a look at RISD. Were there other schools in other cities that you were looking at as well? Was there something about RISD in Providence that you're like, this is where I need to be? Was there a specific program that RISD had that other schools didn't?
My art teacher really said, if you think you want to go to art school, RISD is really the best. And so I applied to RISD, and I applied to the University of Utah, and that was kind of it. I think I applied maybe to the University of Chicago early admissions, but it was really just RISD and the University of Utah that I was focused on. And so I'm really glad that I got into RISD, because if not, I would probably still be in Utah.
So you get to RISD, and this was about, not trying to age anything here, but this was
Oh my
about
gosh,
10
Jason.
years ago?
This was a lot longer than that. I got to Providence in 2006.
Okay. So you got here in 2006, you go through RISD, you go through its program, which I have some questions about that later down the road. Anyways, listen to the show. I want to say criticisms, but I've had some interesting questions about RISD and what they teach there, which I want to ask you later. But you go through the program, and you, like anybody who gets out of college, you have to pay back those loans, or you just have to eat, you got to survive. And was your first job at AS220, and was it silk screening?
It was. So when I was an undergrad student at RISD, I really wanted to take a letterpress printing class, but the printmaking department wasn't offering it at the time. Graphic design was, but it was really hard to get into that class. So I actually found AS220 and signed up for a course when I was, I think, a sophomore or a junior at RISD. And then through that course, I was able to meet everyone who was volunteering and running the print shop, who were also a lot of RISD printmaking grads. And then I started to teach screen printing there. So when I graduated, I was really lucky to already have this place that was a great print community, but also a place that I was able to work part-time and teach, which is such a great opportunity.
So wait, you were teaching a printmaking class at screen printing class, sorry, at AS220 while you were still at RISD?
Yeah, I think maybe when I was a senior, or if not, it was just right after. There was a little bit of overlap, if I'm remembering correctly.
I'm just curious, is like, did they ask you to teach, or were you just like, yeah, my screen printing game is so strong, I definitely need to teach here?
Jason, between you and me, my screen printing game is great, but not the best, or it's not the thing that I specialize in. But I think it was a situation where there was just a need. And because I had just gone through all of those RISD courses, my skills were pretty fresh.
I think this is just another, actually, I think pretty good side question from a tactical perspective. I didn't even plan on asking this, but you were just saying like, hey, screen printing, not like I'm good, but it's not my main thing, but there was a need, and you went into it, and like then you had a position that paid, right? Do you think there are times where, whether it's an artist, whether it's somebody in a creative field, like, etc., where sometimes they have the blinders on, like it's almost like, because like that opportunity wasn't put on you, just saw that there was a need and you filled it, and you took advantage of it. Do you think that sometimes happens where like people put the blinders on, like, hey, my main thing is this, so I'm only going to pursue this, but there may be opportunities elsewhere, but because they have that blinder, like, it maybe shuts them out of like certain careers or certain pathways?
I think that can definitely happen. And also, I think coming out of RISD for me, I was really ready to take any job. And so, because I had the opportunity to teach and had relationships at AS220, I was kind of ready to take any position and any class that really would have been offered. So, I think for me, it's kind of about just being in the right place at the right time, and also really starting to form those networks as early as you can, even if it's not in the thing that you want to end up in. It's hopefully adjacent to it, or sort of helping you get to that next place to get to where you want to be in the end.
So it's like, if it can get you into the, maybe not the exact thing you're trying to be in, but the world of the thing you're trying to be in, then it could be beneficial.
Right. Totally.
And I've noticed, like, you've been a studio technician for RISD, you've been a teaching assistant, gallery assistant, all these different positions. What led you to DWRI letterpress, which the DWRI, that's like, there's a fashion joke in there, right? Like a DKNY reference or something like that.
So the shop owner's name is Dan Wood. And so the shop is Dan Wood, Rhode Island. It's really hard to answer the phone sometimes. DWRI letterpress is kind of a mouthful, but it definitely is. You got the fashion joke dead on.
So what, you had the different positions at AS220. And actually, sorry to backtrack a little bit here. Could you just let people listening know what AS220 is? Because I think it is an important organization in Providence, but you could probably define it way better than I could.
Well, we can do it together. So AS220 is a really large arts nonprofit that's based in Providence. And within the whole organization of AS220, there are some industries or sort of smaller programming. So they have an amazing youth program. They have a fab lab and a makerspace, a photography area with darkroom access, and then also the print shop. So the print shop has silkscreen printing, etching, offset printing, letterpress printing, really anything, that you would be exposed to in a traditional print shop, but at a place that's, community run and with really affordable shop access.
I think that was the perfect definition. So,
Phew. And also, Jason, you really picked some deep cuts off my CV that I think, the studio technician, I think that was my inflated, like, oh, I'm about to graduate. I got to put every experience on my CV that I can find.
I'm trying to build the reputation as Providence's answer to Nardwar. So I gotta live up to that. I'm glad you got the reference. So anybody listening, that's what I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be Providence's answer to Nardwar, just not on camera and a little bit less awkward, slightly less awkward. So how did that lead you to DWRI letterpress? Because one thing that in my limited knowledge of letterpress, it's a pretty specialized thing. It's not. I would say it's not as there's a lot of like silk screening places, especially if you're trying to get shirts done, things like that. There's way more of those than letterpress. So how did you find your way into DWRI?
Yeah, sure. So I actually met Dan, who's the shop owner, while I was still at RISD. I took his intro to letterpress printing class. So as I mentioned, the printmaking department wasn't offering the course when I wanted to take it, but then the next year, Dan was teaching it. And so I was able to learn from him. And I started working for him part-time, I think a year or so out of school. And when I started with him, I was kind of the part-time person, and the business has really grown in the last 12 years since I've been there. So we now have 3 full-time employees in addition to Dan, which has been really nice.
And so before getting into, deep diving a little bit more into your experience at DWRI, because I do have some questions around that.
Yeah.
Can you explain the process, just what letterpress is in,
Sure.
versus like silk screening? Because we were mentioning both of those, but just what letterpress is and maybe why it is kind of like a specialized thing. Because to my, again, with my limited knowledge, I think there's very, very few people that actually know how to maintain the equipment and keep the stuff that lets letterpress happen running.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So letterpress printing is really a mechanized form of relief printing. So relief printing covers everything from like wood blocks or linoleum blocks, or even if anybody's made a potato print, that's relief printing. So you're carving out a surface and then pushing it into the surface of a sheet. Letterpress printing is just really a faster way to do that. So we're using either wood type and metal type, which people think about. So individual letters that we're putting together. We're casting new metal type. We have some equipment there that's unique to our shop. And then we're also working from what's called a photopolymer plate. And that is really, 80% of our work is through those plates. And what you can do is send us a PDF, and it can be any typeface. There can be an image. You can really do anything you want, and we can turn that into a printing plate. So that's really sort of modernized a lot of letterpress printing and really kind of came up in the 70s and 80s, but really is contemporary letterpress printing is based in that technology.
So another question too, you were into the craft of letterpress, right? And that's what led you out of high school into RISD, etc. Did you ever have a concern, or maybe your parents or your colleagues? Because I'm coming from the world of tech, right? And I've noticed that something in tech, like, it's good to be specialized in really niche things, but then if something happens to that niche thing, if that's all you're specialized in, it's this like weird double-edged sword where it's like there's not a lot of people you have to compete with, and that could be good. But then from a viability perspective, if that thing goes away, then like that's a whole other issue. Was there ever a concern, either now or in the past, of like, hey, this is really specialized, and like, how long is this going to be viable for?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for me, when I was at RISD and studying printmaking, I really wanted to work in an editioning shop. So the fine art editioning shops, there are a handful around, and they work with different artists to come in, make a print, and then there's a whole team of people that actually produce that print. So because I was so interested in the craft and the technique of printmaking, I wanted to use my skills sort of in that field and in that market. And you're right that there just aren't a lot of, the capacity. They're not hiring everybody right out of school. And I think that's something, with art school in general, it's hard to kind of, use what you've learned in that situation if you don't get a job in the right field or, become immediately successful. So for me, I think also, fine art printmaking tends to be pretty expensive, not only to produce, but also to collect. You need a lot of specialized equipment, and the value of prints is kind of arbitrary, I think, in a lot of ways for the contemporary market. So moving into the commercial printing was more appealing to me because letterpress printing allows you to make a lot of something in a faster way. So for a lot of my work, I make posters, and so it's easy to make 200 posters in an hour or two versus 10 copperplate etchings in 5 days. So it's just a different speed.
I'm glad you mentioned the commercial part of it. So at DWRI, I noticed a couple of things. Production coordinator, and also you were, lead designer and wedding specialist. And I think there was another podcast where the person that had you on, you did their wedding invitations.
Let's see. Was that maybe Sasha from?
I think it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which was really fun too. And again, it's all about making connections. So we do a lot of, business cards, wedding invites, and then some art editioning and some book work too. It's really a wide range of things that we do. And that kind of keeps it interesting because not every job is the same. Everything's got its own set of things to troubleshoot and things to work around.
And see, that part I find interesting because I would not think of, letterpress like, oh, I should go there to get my business cards done or my wedding invitations. Right. But it's not it's at least for me, it's not the first thing that comes to mind. So as I was learning about it, I'm like, oh, maybe I should look at that as, that solution to my business card problem, etc. Being a production, actually going through the production process. So this is a 2-part question. One, can you, whether it's wedding invitations, business cards, poster, you can pick, but just, can you walk through the process of how a job at DWRI gets done from somebody calls and you have to answer DWRI real quick and the types of questions you have to ask them or types of information you need and just the process of all right, this client has this requirement, this need, can the shop fulfill that? What's the turnaround time? How we're going to charge, how we're going to deliver it, how we're going to get payment, et cetera, et cetera. Can you just walk through that entire process?
Yeah, sure. So I think production coordinator is a little outdated maybe. So Tom Sprankle, who joined our shop about 4 years ago, is our current production coordinator, even though I still call him the new guy, even though it's been 4 years. So Tom and I will work in tandem with new sales. So I'll answer the phone and try to get as much information from someone as I possibly can, which hopefully results in switching over to email so that we can look at proofs if they have something to show us or something that's ready to print. And also just to firm up pricing over email. I usually get into trouble if I do pricing over the phone because maybe I've forgotten, maybe I'm short. We want to make sure that we're pricing every job appropriately to cover the materials, the time, the labor, and all of, the rent and all of those things that are on the back end. So hopefully somebody calls, we switch to email, I'll put together pricing and try to figure out what they actually need and if they're on a timeline. So with a wedding client, we might be working with a designer and never talking to the client themselves. We might be talking to a client who has a friend who's a designer and is sending us files that are ready to go. Or we might be working with the client directly and doing the design process with them. So if we're doing the design with a client, that process can be between 2 and 3 weeks. And then the printing production time itself is generally between 1 and 3 weeks. So letterpress printing is just a slower process, and we're also having a harder time getting materials in at the moment, as lots of folks are. So once I have all those details done and the price is approved and the files are approved, everything goes to Tom, who gets everything ordered in and prepared. And then it goes to probably Hope, who's our third press operator, another RISD grad. And Hope will print everything. Maybe it goes to Dan, who's the shop owner. Maybe it needs some hot foil, and Dan specializes in that area. And then everything goes back to Tom, and he'll trim everything, count everything, wrap everything, and then send the invoice. So at that stage, I might reach back out to the client and just say, hey, these are ready. Are we shipping? Are we pick up? So I sort of get to people at the beginning and at the end of the process. Did I miss anything there?
I don't think you did. I don't think you did at all. And the reason why, and I'm glad you took, you went through the entire process. And I wanted to ask, because you have that, have that position that you work in, along the many other things that you do, which I want to ask about those as well. You are a very busy person.
I think so.
And so you have that, but then you have, your own, I guess I'll put like your own fine arts projects that you do, and the things you have like prints for sale on your site. Is there a blending where it's good, like they're both blending into each other, or is it more, do you try to keep them like mentally separated?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I bet I probably try to keep it mentally separated on paper, but it's tricky when you're doing creative things. Sometimes, you're sneaking things in on a lunch break, or you're leaving work early to do a podcast interview. So I'm really lucky that Dan is super flexible, and, I've taken time off to go to a residency for a few weeks and really focus on my art practice. So it's good to work for another artist who kind of understands that there are, busier times in the shop where I'm there a lot, or times that are less busy and I can work remote or just work fewer hours. And, there is definitely some blending, primarily because I do a lot of letterpress printing in my work. And that's really because I have access to Dan's shop and I'm able to make work there. So, because I have had access to those presses for the last 12 years, that's really informed a lot of the way that I make my work. And, I didn't graduate from RISD making a lot of text-based work, but because I'm surrounded by letter forms all day, I really have gotten a lot more comfortable with using text in my own art practice.
So I think that's actually a really good segue. Yep. You'd think we would plan this, people, but I don't. I plan some of this, but not really. But I think that's a really good segue into what about the process of, I'm thinking more of just from a business aspect of just like business processes and things like that. Going through that at DWRI and, having to coordinate and talk with clients and all these other things. What did that teach you that informed your own work when it comes to how you were putting your own work out, whether it was the production process, whether it was how you published it, whether it was how you put it up for sale?
That's a good question, I guess. To me, they don't overlap a ton. My own fine art practice, I'm doing more kind of gallery exhibition work. I am selling some prints here and there. But trying to figure out also kind of more grant applications and things that aren't necessarily tied to the selling of work, if that makes sense. But I do definitely think that I've learned a lot in terms of planning a print and sort of understanding, the time and tricks that it takes to get something actually made, which I think, coming from RISD, sometimes there's a gap that's missing there from, the printmaking department or the graphic design department. There's, I've got an idea, but then how do I actually get it made and then store it as kind of a tricky thing?
I do want to ask one more question about more of just the commercial selling of your own stuff. And then I do want to go into the gallery stuff too, because I think that's really interesting. So if you go on your site right now, and I did, and
oh my gosh,
and
I've totally forgotten what my website looks like.
Right now. I'm a little sad I can't buy the dance print, because being a DJ, that was my favorite one.
Jason, I think I found one in my studio when I was cleaning. So let's email afterward.
Oh, yes. Great.
Yeah, and it'll fall off the truck. See, this is why I don't make any money selling
amazing. So speaking of making money selling your own stuff, I do have a question of and I've had various answers to this, so I want to get your take on it. Because art, especially, depending on who's viewing it, if they're actually buying the art because they want it in their home or in a private collection, depending on how many pieces there are. Maybe it's a one-off, depending if they're actually buying it because they like it versus like, I'm going to invest in this and hopefully this investment will be worth a lot of money in years. How do you go about, and there's various price points on your site, which I think is great. How do you go about pricing your own work? And has that ever been a struggle for you as far as like, yeah, like how do I put a monetary value on this? Like, yep, it should be this price. And what factors, at least for you, go into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tough thing, I think, for an artist at any stage in their career. So, the base way to think about it is, okay, what did I spend on materials? How much labor did I put in? If I'm paying myself X number of hours, how much do I need to charge for each print to make it past that? I've also heard someone say, however large your edition size is. So with prints, you're making not just one, you're hopefully making an edition of 8, an edition of 20, an edition of 100. I've heard someone say that if you sell a third of your edition, it should cover all of your production costs. So that's one way to think about it. I think for me, because I'm able to make work at a commercial volume, so I can make prints a little quicker, it's nice to be able to have a variety of price points. To be able to ship prints, that are $15 or $20. The tricky thing for me, and I really did think the store was disabled on my website, Jason, is that I only have so many hours in the day. And as much as I love making sure that people have access to my work, it actually does take a fair amount of time to, when an order comes in, to find it in my studio, pack it, ship it, get it to the post office, etc. So it's something that I've sort of pivoted a little bit away from as I've had kind of a busier summer. So it always kind of goes in swings, depending on what my capacity is.
I want to get into why you've had a busier spring and summer. So, we were talking about your own work, and you've done a lot of work in the fine arts world. How did you, because you've done a number of gallery shows.
Uh-huh.
What was your first gallery show? And can you walk through like how that happened? Was it somebody come to you? Did you have an idea and then you had to go find the resources? What was that first gallery show and just what was it like leading up to it, going from, okay, like I have the opportunity now, I have to, up until like the opening exhibition, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I should ask you because it sounds like you have my CV printed out and referencing. But I think for me, maybe the best place to start is I had a show at AS220, sharing the gallery with Dan in 2017. And I think to me, that's kind of where I really started making the work that I'm still making today. I think coming out of art school, there's always a little bit of floundering to try and figure out how to take the practice that you've developed in school and then continue it into real world stuff. So for me, that point kind of came, 5, 6, or 7 years out of school. And AS220 is such an amazing resource because in addition to all those spaces to make work, they have an unjuried gallery space. So you can put your name in for a gallery show and then kind of hop onto the wait list. And Neil Walsh, who is the gallery coordinator there, is amazing and, helps hang things, helps with price list, can help with writing, and has really been super helpful for both of my shows that I've had at AS220. But I really do think, especially in Providence, it's really about finding a space, and usually people aren't coming to you. I hope someday some people will come to me instead of me feeling like I'm chasing people down. But, there are a lot of details that go into it. You've got to get photos taken of the work so that the show can be promoted. You've got to put together a price list, and then you have to get things framed, which is always so tricky. And then you just have to tell people about the show and hopefully get them there. So it's all a lot of kind of little things that, you're not just making the artwork. You have to do all this back end stuff to get it up and on the wall.
And then speaking of that back end work, what is the process just in general for you if there's somebody who's studying at RISD or studying somewhere else and just wants to do a gallery show, but they just have no idea of where to start or what the process is. What is that like? Are you just like reaching out to any gallery that you think would be a good fit and be like, hey, I'm this artist, or like how does that process come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is networking. So, you can check out galleries that you like and spaces that you like. And it doesn't have to be a gallery either. I think traditional galleries are definitely great and one way to show work. But, I've shown work in a pop up space that was in an empty storefront. So you can kind of think of, non traditional spaces that maybe would let you borrow them for a month or two and kind of go about that. And I think, I was in a lot of group shows right out of school. So things that weren't, the shows just weren't my work or me plus somebody else. It was a whole range of shows. And I think I was applying to those. So, there are lots of different calls and you can say, oh, does my work fit into this? Does it fit into this? And those are great to kind of get things off the ball or get things rolling. But it can also be tricky in terms of logistics. You've got to apply to those things. You've got to take the photographs. You've got to ship the thing. You got to make sure you get the thing back. So it's all kind of a balancing act.
And I'm glad you mentioned non-traditional spaces. And the reason why I asked that is that I've noticed even some galleries that I've been to
Mhm.
see artists that I like. I'll just put it this way. Not a lot of the galleries in Providence are like this, which is great, but there have been some where even some in the greater Rhode Island area where I go and it's like everybody's got a suit on and I feel severely underdressed. And it's one
Mhm.
of those like, all right, like I feel a little out of place, like I like this artist, but has that ever been something you have run into where it's just like, hey, I want to show my work here, and then the night of the gallery opening comes and it's the vibe, I guess, or the feeling of the exhibition or the space the exhibition is in is the artwork don't. Has that ever happened to you, like where they don't match up?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think off the top of my head if that's happened to me. And primarily, if I'm having an opening, I'm trying to get everyone that I know there. So I'm already kind of building up a crowd of people. But it is always nice when the gallery does have kind of a crowd that comes in. But I think what you're, mentioning is that, traditional galleries can often feel kind of isolating because it is, more of sort of a buttoned up environment. And I think for me, that's why I've been interested in showing work in non traditional spaces or also just creating work that doesn't live in a gallery. So, a poster can live outside on a street wherever it gets hung. I've hired a plane to carry a message over the beaches. So to me, I think there's definitely a place for galleries in a lot of ways, but also it's nice to think outside of that form to spaces that more people can see the work and, people that just might not be on the regular like Thursday night gallery hop.
I want to ask about that plane thing in a bit.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, so you've done gallery shows, you do your own printmaking, you actually work in more of a commercial job as well,
Hmm.
and then another piece of it is grants and residencies. Because I've noticed the Interlace
Hmm.
Fund, so
Yes.
and the Interlace Fund, I believe, is what backed "Wish You Were Here," which is
Hmm.
something else I want to ask about. But you know, grants, funds, residencies, these are things that I've noticed where is it like like getting into a gallery where it's just like you have to network and you have to just kind of search these things out and apply? And do you think enough artists out there know about all these things, or is it more of like you still have to kind of hunt this stuff down?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there is definitely some networking that's involved because it's, within my own community of artists that I talk to, I go, oh, residency applications are coming up. What are you guys applying to? Oh, I haven't heard about that residency. I'll definitely check them out. There are also a lot of really great resources, and one that's based in Rhode Island is the Artist Communities Alliance, which has this huge listing of different residencies and sort of gives you a snapshot of what each residency offers. So, the tricky thing with residencies is I think sometimes it can be hard to get into your first residency because they want to see a residency maybe on your CV. And so,
So it's like a chicken or egg situation.
exactly.
It's like, hey, I want to get my first residency. Well, you need a residency, but I haven't had a residency yet. That's why I want to do this first residency. Well, you need a residency. It's like,
Exactly, and
okay.
I got really lucky, Jacob Berendez, who's an artist in town, was offering a residency called CTRI, which is Coffee Tea Rhode Island, and the residency was the length of a cup of coffee, and so I put that first on my CV, and that kind of kicked things off in terms of programs that I was able to apply to.
I want the link for that later because that's amazing. The residency is really the cup of coffee.
Totally.
That's
And
great.
I think that things are sort of on pause due to COVID, but I'll definitely see if I can find the link. But for me, residencies are great because it's a chunk of time that's usually somewhere else and pretty uninterrupted. So you get, usually access to studio space and again, a new network of artists that are also at the residency. And so, residencies are definitely something that I've been slowly working towards and trying to hopefully have one of those a year, which has really helped me sort of focus in on my practice. And then in terms of grants, I will say that I write a lot of grants. I don't receive a lot of grants, but I'm so glad that I received the Interlace grant, which really helped to fund this last project that it sounds like we'll talk about a little later. But the calls for that grant, which are specific to Providence artists, are actually due on October 11th. So since this is going to air on the 4th, you'll have a whole week. And there's nothing I love more than last minute grant writing. So I would really encourage Providence folks to apply.
So actually, quick, two questions about that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk through the grant writing or grant application process? And if you do get the grant, are there terms and conditions that you have to meet on your side? Is there, boundaries in place on what you can and can't do and what they pay for and don't pay for? And then once you walk through that, can you do the same about a residency? Because I think there's some good behind the scenes information that I think would be valuable, especially for somebody who's never applied for a residency or a grant before, or the expectations of, it's money, but there's probably conditions and terms tied to both of those situations.
Sure. So grants really depend on the specific grant that's offered. So some grants say you can't use this funding for capital equipment, for religious events, for food, for re-granting. And I'm actually just realizing I'm reading off the Rhode Island State Council of the Arts grant list because I just finished that one yesterday. And then other grants have sort of a more open-ended, a more open-ended list of requirements. So maybe there's a report that's due at the end of the year. Maybe you have to do a certain number of check-ins every year. Some grants are project-based, meaning that you're writing a proposal, asking for funding for that specific project, and then executing from the plan that you've turned in. Or there are unrestricted grants, which are really just funding of any amount. And Rhode Island does have some really amazing grant resources that are unique to the state. So I mentioned Rhode Island State Council of the Art, which is RISCA, and then also the McCall Johnson grant, which is every 3 years. So it's visual artists 1 year, composers the next year, and then I think writers the third year, and then it kind of cycles around. And then in terms of residencies, again, usually when you're applying, there's some type of while I'm at the residency, I will work on blank, even though, nobody is really checking in on you there. But some of those residencies also have a public element. So, we're going to have open studios this night, or, we'd love if you could donate a piece of artwork to our year-end auction to support other residencies. Did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just curious because you did a residency out in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And
at Anderson Ranch in Snowmass Village.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, it's just hey, I applied to this residency in Colorado, and then they're just okay, do they just pay for everything, your room and board to be out there for 5 weeks, or?
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. Residency programs really vary depending on the funding that they have available. So some residencies will pay for you to go to the residency as a stipend. Some residencies are you're paying for. Some residencies offer food, some residencies don't. So as you're applying, and as I'm looking at the list of residencies, I'm trying to think, okay, if I do pay for this one, can I do 2 weeks? Okay, if I get funding, can I do 4 weeks? Is it a residency where I am looking for someone that supplies food? Because sometimes for me, taking a break during the middle of the day to figure out what I'm going to eat for dinner kind of sometimes throws off my flow. So sometimes, that's a deciding factor too. They all have different things that they provide and different, environments that they really specialize in. So as you are applying to residencies, you can really spend so much time just putting together your dream list. And I'll say too, one great piece of advice that I got as I was applying early on is to look for programs that are newer. So They may still be working on kinks in some of the programming, but chances are the application pool is going to be a lot smaller. So you're going up against less prospective people.
I'm glad that Lois brought up the process and the difficulty of landing her first residency, because I think that is something universal. Landing that first gig, that first residency, that first job, that first show is really difficult. One gem of knowledge that Lois drops here is being open to opportunities that may not be exactly what you want, but still within the world of what you want, like the opportunity at AS220, and seeking out residencies off the beaten path like Coffee and Tea, Rhode Island. Both helped her network and build momentum for her next opportunity. So, take a page out of Lois's playbook. Be open to and seek out opportunities and experiences off the beaten path, and use that momentum to grow and elevate. Usually this is the other way around the show. It's the creative stuff first and the tactical. So I think it's kind of interesting that we did the tactical first, then the creative. There's going to be a couple more tactical questions towards the end now, but I do want to get it. I think it's just, it's funny we switched it up. I do want to get into your work, because I think it's safe to say, it's the safe assumption that I'm making, that there is an amount of activism interlaced with your work or intertwined with your work.
Mm-hmm.
And, for example, I think you did the Print to Disarm talk with Allie Thatcher, who's been another guest on the show. Go listen to that episode. Listen to this one first and then go listen to that episode. Finish this one. Don't stop this one. Sorry, I have to shamelessly self-promote my own show. You did the Print to Disarm talk, and, as far as activism being intertwined with your work, was that something that was always there from the get-go, or was that something that, as you were honing your skills and just putting out more work into the world, it started coming? It was like, was it an evolution, or was that from the get-go you knew, like, I think, hey, there's some activism that I want to put out to the world via my work?
Yeah, I think it's something that's kind of developed in the last few years, as I've really started to kind of, get more comfortable with my voice, and also understanding what kind of the power of print can do. And sort of, I mentioned posters, and sort of, that to me is a really democratic form, because it, usually they're free, and they live in the world and really go up in any place. So it's nice to be able to match my art form to sort of a political voice or a viewpoint. And I think for me, a lot of my work is based on my identity as a Japanese American woman. And so my family has a history with Japanese American incarceration. My grandmother on my dad's side, her family was forcibly relocated from just outside of San Diego to Poston, Arizona, from 1942 to 1945. And it's a history that was really never talked about in my own family. And it's something that I started to explore through my work in probably about 2016 or 2017, I think, in that AS220 show that I mentioned earlier. And that history and sort of work to sort of uncover what that means has really informed a lot of my work since then. And also, as a Rhode Island resident, that sort of becomes then intertwined with Victory Day, which is the holiday that's observed on the second Monday of August, and is often called Victory Over Japan Day or VJ Day. So I think in a lot of ways, that's the most visible activism in my work, is to try to get Rhode Islanders to sort of rethink the naming of that day.
I want to ask about both of those things. So that show that you referred to, is that the Wish You Were Here show?
No, so that one, that show just came down. It was at Katie Tompkins Projects. And that show featured 6 posters that were based on WPA travel posters. So if you can imagine those really bright, poppy, kind of See America posters or national parks. Yep. And they were also accompanied by a penny press. And that show was the show that was really funded by the Interlace grant, which was great because I don't think I would have bought that penny press otherwise. Even though I've been talking about it for years, and I'm so sorry to anyone in Providence who's had to listen to me talk about the penny press. Now I finally have it, and it lives here.
How, trying to like word this question correctly, because there are some artists out there where, there's the work they do, but then there's like commercial work, and then there's fine arts work, but then there may be a degree of separation of like the person themselves versus the art that they put out.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's very closely intertwined. For you, especially, from what I can understand, or let me ask for you, when you do these projects that, I'm guessing come from a really personal place, do you find it easier as far as it's coming from a personal place? Or is it tougher to create these artworks because it's coming from such a personal place? Especially like the Wish You Were Here show, the with the history of your grandmother and being interned and things like that. Do you find it easier to complete that work, or do you find it harder because it's coming from like such a personal place and a personal history?
Yeah, it's definitely both for me. Because it is, part of my story and my history, it's easy to sort of speak with that voice because it's mine. But it is harder because with a lot of that work, to step into that mindset and read and research and sort of understand what that experience would have been, it's a pretty dark and depressing place. So, it's sort of balancing, how involved to be in the work, which for me is usually pretty involved. And I think I try to become, I'm trying to become as well educated on the subject as I can be, because I'm realizing that history is just less taught on the East Coast, it seems like. Someone coming from the West that was closer physically to that history, it's just much more prevalent. So it's been, there is a weight of wanting to make sure that I can answer questions as people have them. And with a lot of my work around that subject, I'm always trying to make work that's inviting or interesting so that people get a little closer to it and get invested in it, and then sort of realize that there's this subtext, and that subtext is a place to open the conversation about the work.
And can you touch upon the rename Victory Day? Is that something that you bought? Is that one of the projects where you bought the plane for, or was that something different?
That's the one. So
Okay.
in 2019, I started a poster campaign to just get residents to rethink the naming of that holiday. As someone who's not from Rhode Island, it was always very confusing why we were taking the day off and how it tied to the war for me. So I made a series of posters that said things like Ocean State Day, Quahog Day, Beach Day, Lobster Roll Day, Mayor's Bay Day, and hung those up around town with a hashtag as well, to use on Instagram. And I'm a little later to the social media game, but have started to kind of realize that is a good place to share my work and sort of my message. And the next iteration of that poster project was a large poster that said Rename Victory Day, that I worked with a lot of local businesses to hang in their storefronts. And then I also hired a banner towing plane out of Westerly, Rhode Island, to carry that message across the Rhode Island beaches on Victory Day itself. So the banner towing plane, if you've ever been to the beach, they're often carrying messages like car insurance, like whatever twisted tea is most popular then, or like any new beverage product. But they have this whole room of nylon letters that are about 5 or 6 feet tall. And the letters can actually lock together and create any message that you want. And so I think for me, because the holiday can be pretty polarizing, a lot of people come to me and say, oh, you're trying to take a day away from the veterans. And that's really not my intent. We have Veterans Day, and Rhode Island does have a huge, veteran population that was especially involved during World War II. But I think in today's times, people are often using that day to go to the beach. And I definitely don't want to take the holiday away. I just want people to sort of rethink the naming of it. So that plane carried the message over the beaches for a few hours. And it was really interesting response because it was sort of taking my art form out of a printed sheet and sort of putting it in the place where it would be most seen. And so I'm excited to sort of use more forms of advertising going forward, because I think that it's interesting to spin that form, but into, more of an art intervention, if that makes sense.
Leads perfectly into my next question. Again, I wish I was smart enough to plan these transitions, people. I'm not. I'll admit it. I'm not. And it actually brings up another guest, Kanitha Brown. Go listen to that episode too, but finish this one first. Finish this one, then listen to all the other ones. But Kanitha, she made a interesting point when it came to her photography and her personal history, where the particular photographic medium that she chose had a political history attached to it. And, what I've noticed is that you were saying about the letterpress, how it's fat, it's quick, like it's posters, they can be hung anywhere. And then even when you were talking about the Wish You Were Here show, which kind of took the see Utah, see Colorado kind of posters and flipped them on its head, and like how even that, I guess, medium or that kind of artwork had like a propaganda bent to it. How important it is, do you think people need to realize, or maybe they don't realize, that certain artistic mediums or certain styles of art have like this political history, or have this propaganda history, or like just either the medium or the formatting, and what can be done to turn that on its head and kind of recontextualize it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that knowing the history of those things is important, and that's sort of something that I'm trying to tie together with my work, is to bring awareness not only to the history of Japanese American incarceration, but also maybe the form of that WPA poster. And I guess to me, it's sort of, always interesting, especially now, to think about misinformation and sort of the fake news and all of the different ways that we're experiencing media, and sort of how that shifted conversations and dialogue. So it's also kind of something in the back of my head to think about, what forms are people seeing now versus what were they seeing then, and how has that changed things?
And with some of these projects being personal, because I think this is interesting with fine art as well. You were mentioning the fake news and misinformation. I think that had, I'm not mistaken, that had to do with one of your projects with like the symbolism of flags. I think it was. Sorry, I'm blanking on the name of that project. But are you ever because you were bringing up those two topics? So I've always wondered, does an artist, especially when they do a project that's so personal to them, is there ever a worry that any of the pieces of the project itself gets misinterpreted?
Sure. So, I think that's always a huge worry. And it's, as I'm making work, I can try to give people as much context as possible to view the work, but you're right that things get kind of pulled apart and looked at in different ways. So to me, it's always balancing, does this thing stand on its own? But then also, if people want to learn more information, how does that kind of also inform the piece? And I think the piece that you're referring to is called Signals, which is about signal flags.
Yes, it was Signals. Thank you.
And it was based on nautical signaling flags. So again, a Rhode Island reference to the ocean. But I really wanted to pick a nonverbal form of communication that had a super direct and clear message. So, one of the flags is "Keep clear of me," or things like "I have a pilot on board." But it was interesting to see how people responded to those flags, and then took that saying and kind of also then reinterpreted it, even though it was very clear and very black and white. Out of context, they sort of turned into something else. So it is always really important to remember that work has a life, once you've made it and sort of kind of let it into the world. That's kind of impossible to control. And I think trying to think too much about what that reception is going to be is kind of a tricky place to be in, because it's sort of paralyzing to me, in a lot of ways.
What goes into not just the idea for a project, but like, I guess how you go about the pieces. Cause the reason why I asked, when you said the plane things, I remember seeing
Mhm.
that. I remember actually
Oh,
seeing
cool.
that banner. So when you say play, I'm trying to put two together in my head. I'm like, oh, like that's probably, I'm like, oh, that's got to be the person that did it. So how do you go about just, like, hey, all right, hey, I like coming up with the concept for a show, even just the concept in general, and then coming up with the pieces that inform it. Because it's not every day somebody's like, I'm going to hire a plane and I think
Yeah.
that's great that you like you said, you're trying to explore, even advertising. I don't think everybody thinks of advertising and turning advertising on its head as a way to, showcase art. So what informs that? What informs you going like, yeah, I'm a penny press machine, I'm going to do that, or I'm going to get a plane, or I'm going to do this?
Boy, that's a good question. And there's often a deadline involved. I don't know about you, but I'm a little bit of a procrastinator, which I'm just admitting to myself now. So with something like a gallery show, when you sign up at AS220, for instance, your wait list is you're waiting for usually a few years before that show comes up. So there's always time to sort of think about what that show means and sort of make work for it. It is sort of tricky. I mean, I guess I don't think of work necessarily in terms of a gallery exhibition, but more thinking about it sort of as individual bodies of work. And the penny press to me, was something that I knew I needed a little bit of grant funding for because it was just a little too much of a stretch for me without the funding. But it's such an interesting form that brings back nostalgia for a lot of people really quickly. Machine is commonly seen at zoos or amusement parks. So everyone, a lot of people have interacted with that machine, but it's again taking a known form and sort of making people be part of the project. They've got to put the change in, they've got to pick what penny it is, they've got to learn about the penny, and then they have to put in the labor to actually manufacture the piece. And with the plane project, that one really came together pretty last minute. I was a little behind on doing stuff for Victory Day that year, as I often am. And I think the idea sort of came about as I was at the beach maybe or about to head to the beach and sort of thought, oh, this would be a cool thing. I don't know what this costs or how this even happens, but my partner, who's in a band, had hired a banner towing plane for one of their album covers. And so he had the phone number and the person to go. And it's, of course, Rhode Island, so there's just one person to go to. But that sort of helped me get over the hump of doing some of that initial research. And that plane project was unique because I also knew that I needed a little bit of funding, but I went right to Instagram to ask people directly for help. And it was really exciting and interesting to me that people wanted to get involved, with dollar amounts that were, $5, $10, anything really helped and went towards the project. And I think it made people feel a little bit more involved in the work that I was doing and really did make that come together. So it was really a community effort.
So I want to transition from that, and I think that's really interesting of just the process of here's how I'm going to pick the things that go into creation of the pieces that go into the show, because on top of fine arts and commercial projects, you also are you're also involved in getting more artists started in their careers, I guess, is like the best way I could say this. And what I mean by that is if you could speak a bit on New Urban Arts, what it is and how you got involved with them.
Yeah, New Urban Arts is an amazing nonprofit in Providence that offers free after school arts programming to high school age students. So I started volunteering there in 2010, right after graduating from school, and was the printmaking, screen printing mentor there for 2 days a week. And it was such an amazing opportunity to sort of have this drop in style of programming. You're not pitching a class every week, students are finding you, and it's really student driven. So, you're really working on whatever is happening and what the need is in the studio that week. And it's also somewhere that I've volunteered on the board of and spent about 7 years on the board of New Urban Arts, which was also, an amazing opportunity to learn about how a nonprofit functions on the other side of things. So learning about governance, learning about finance, learning about, staffing and all of the things that really go to make that program seem so effortless and just so worthwhile for the students.
Actually, that was going to be my next question.
Oh.
Can you actually dig? Because I noticed you were on the board. I'm like, oh, so she knows the behind the scenes part and how and
Mhm.
like the operations part. How does that all run? And we touched on it a little bit, but could you deep dive into that a little bit? Because I think that's really interesting. Is how does some of these these programs get funded? How do they receive funding? How do they keep going? And how do they operate on the day to day?
Sure. I mean, I think New Urban Arts, I don't know if you know this, there are so many nonprofits in Providence that it's kind of amazing that there's funding for everyone. But, with a program like New Urban Arts, it's a lot of grant funding, from state level and the larger national level. And then with New Urban Arts in particular, it's a really strong annual campaign from individual donors. So just like my plane project, it's a lot of kind of smaller drops into the bucket in addition to that larger grant funding. But it really is just a lot of people that are so dedicated to the mission of the organization, volunteers, staff people, people that really align with the mission and values that New Urban Arts operates by and lives by, and just sort of, a real commitment to that style of learning.
What were some of the decisions of or some of the tasks that maybe you didn't expect would happen in a nonprofit arts organization like that you encountered, well, because you were a board member?
Sure. So this was my first board as well. So the whole thing was really a learning process. And I joined the board after sort of an invitation from Andrew Esch, who is another great artist in town. And, we went through things like donor solicitation, throwing events, how can we support the staff, but also going through a capital campaign, where New Urban Arts actually expanded and sort of ended up with more office space. Because of the nature of the drop-in programming, having that extra office space is super helpful to the staff so that there's a quiet place, to make phone calls to donors or to check in with other people.
I think you
That's
had the
not in that main
not to
studio.
interrupt, you had the
Yeah,
basement that added like the music and music production parts, right?
exactly. Yeah. So the organization has really gone through a few levels of growth. And because I have been there for so much of it, when I started volunteering at New Urban Arts, they were actually in a space that was across the street and was a lot smaller. So the first capital campaign was moving and buying the space that they're currently in. And then you're right, it was renovating the basement, which has a music studio and also a really amazing apparel arts studio. And then now with the office annex, they're really set up, just to continue the great work that they've been going on into the future.
How did that decision come about to add music production? It's something close to my heart, and the apparel, um, I guess like studios or portions of it. Like, how does that decision get made? Like, yeah, these are the things we need to add. Is it based on students saying we need this, we want this, or is there other factors as well?
Oh, you're totally right. It's really student driven. So, you're hearing that need from the students and sort of then working programming around to sort of accommodate that need. And I'll say too, one last New Urban Arts plug is the 25th Anniversary Gala is coming up on Friday, October 14th. And it's going to be at the Providence Art Club. So I'm going to be there, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in the organization, reach out if you have questions, but also hopefully I see a lot of familiar faces there to celebrate the organization's 25th birthday.
You mentioned that Providence has a lot of organizations like New Urban Arts. How vital do you think these types of organizations are to, you know, people who want to enter into the art world, but maybe they don't have the money or the means to have access to a college like RISD, or maybe like the high school or school they go to just does not have a good arts program?
I mean, I think they really do provide such an amazing opportunity, especially now that funding for art teachers, music programs is really getting cut across the board. So having opportunities for students to explore and learn and also just have a place that they can hang out and not feel like they have to get anything done is really a unique opportunity that I think, there are so many great nonprofits that support different school age students in Providence, and young adults. But really, that kind of flexibility and openness that NUA has is pretty unique.
Do you think those programs maybe need to promote more just to let more people know they exist? Because that's one running theme I've noticed, just in general in doing this show is that, hey, like Providence has like all these amazing resources and things of that nature. But then the other side of it I see is that not everybody knows, or the people who need the resources don't know that the resources exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely tough to make sure that your outreach is strong within the community. And I think NUA does do a really great job of reaching out to high schools all across the area. It's not just students from Central and Classical that are going to New Urban Arts, it's students from all over. And so, they're reaching out through the schools and, through other networks. But, I think you're right. It's always tricky to know what resources are available, especially when there are so many resources there.
So speaking of outreach in the city of Providence and arts, you also were a part of the City Life Commission?
Yes, I am on the Art and City Life Commission. I'm underselling myself. I'm the chairperson of the Art and City Life.
So you're the chairperson. You're not just on it. You're the chairperson.
I need to get better at not doing that.
You are the boss, the Duke, the A#1. So I don't know if anybody even understood that reference. If you do, message me. I don't know. I'll buy you a cup of coffee because that's pretty deep cut. But anyway, it's, how should I put this? Art and government don't always get along. So I find it very interesting. And I think this is something that with the city of Providence being very involved in the arts, I think it's good that commission exists. How did you get involved in that commission, and what made you want to get involved in that commission? I think we'll start there, actually.
Yeah, I think it's kind of comes back down to sort of a networking question and sort of, I'm trying to think of who invited me to join the commission in the first place, but I did definitely go to one or two commission meetings as a member of the public, because there was a project that I was interested in. And, all of those commission meetings are open to the public, not just for the Art and City Life Commission, but you could go to a budgeting meeting, you could go to a licensing meeting. So just throwing that out there in case anyone has a lot of time on their hands and wants to see how government happens at a really granular level. But for me, the commission has been a really amazing place to see sort of how public art and works that happen on a much larger scale are implemented within a city. And, Providence has a 1% for art ordinance, meaning that 1% of construction projects goes into funding those works. And it's something that has been on the books for a while, but is really just sort of kicking in now. And it's all very exciting to see because I think we always call Providence the creative capital, as you're well aware. So
there's a history behind why I named the show this, and we're gonna get to that because I have an interesting question for you later. But
good, yeah. So it's nice to have the opportunity to help steward some of those larger public works that I think will be interesting for the residents of Providence, but also for tourists and other people visiting the area.
Do you think that needs to happen more in cities where city and local government and the arts community need to intertwine just to bring, like, I guess, more art to the people, or just make the city a more beautiful place, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can never hurt, especially with the Art and City Life Commission. There are so many calls for artists. So mural projects, artist in residence projects, different ways to support artists doing the work that they're doing, and different opportunities to sort of scale up the work that they're doing.
Speaking of art in the city, I want to talk about the My Home Court project, because I thought that was a pretty cool and pretty interesting project where you got to design a basketball court, essentially, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so how did that project come about? Had you always been interested in the way art and sport intertwines? And we'll start there, and I have like one sub question to add on to that later.
Sure. So I have to be honest that I haven't played basketball since third grade, and definitely was the kid who was following the basketball around and not actually doing the correct thing. So this project was exciting to sort of get to know basketball a little bit more. And My Home Court is a nonprofit that's run in conjunction with Providence College Galleries. And the curators at Providence College, Jamie Lee Lacey and Kate McNamara, contacted me about a studio visit and told me more about this project and sort of what it would entail. And so we've been working together for over a year at this point to sort of walk through what the process of designing for the court looks like, what it has looked like in other cities and other places, and then going through design revisions that eventually ended up in the mural that's completed and was just recently publicly unveiled in Davis Park.
And one thing I liked about that project is that it's a way to experience art that's accessible to basically everybody, like anybody who can go visit that court and see it. How important do you think that is too, is that there are types of artwork that is accessible by everybody? And like, you don't have to go to a gallery show. You don't have to go to an event. Like, you can just experience it. And whether it's the city backing it or not, how important do you think that is, that there are types of art where everybody can experience it, regardless of where you're at in the general public?
Well, I think it's hugely important. And I think for me, that's why it was so great to work with my home court. Providence has so many amazing public parks, and the public parks department does an amazing job of maintaining those facilities. So being able to, work on a larger scale for me that wasn't paper, but was this huge kind of flat canvas to work on, was great to not only think about scaling up my work, in terms of size, but also in terms of outreach. So, people from all over use that basketball court, for the court. They walk around the park. The VA overlooks the park. There's a community garden there as well. So it's a really interesting cross section of people that are using that space, and maybe they get to the gallery, maybe not. But this mural really is a living thing that's really entrenched in the community.
So on top of all these things you do, you also teach, and you teach at RISD.
I just started.
You just started teaching, I think it was portfolio projects and a pre-press and risograph. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that course.
Risograph. Yeah, so I'm teaching in the graphic design department and the printmaking department at RISD.
Did RISD reach out to you, or did you go back and say, hey, I want to teach now?
That I feel like maybe I've been subliminally reaching out for years, but I was teaching in the RISD continuing education department as well, leading up to the start of this semester. So I've always sort of been involved and around, and I worked a little in the alumni office too. For me, I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, but not a Master of Fine Arts. So that makes me pretty difficult to employ at the college level. So I was really grateful for the opportunity to teach this fall, especially in 2 departments. So it's been great to meet students from all different departments and really focus in on print projects for the semester.
It seems like you enjoy teaching, whether it's at AS220 or at RISD. Is there? So I think it's interesting. Like, it's one thing when you have your skill set and the thing you work in, but it's another thing when you have to teach somebody how to do what you do. Has there been experiences in teaching where you've had to step back and kind of reevaluate your own processes, or has it made you go back to the drawing board and go, I need to rethink this?
Oh, I'm sure that there have been. I think for me, I'm realizing that teaching is an important part of my practice. I love sharing what I've learned, and I really enjoy seeing other people work through problems that they might be facing in a print or a different project. And so I think I've really been trying to teach off and on since I graduated from RISD, whether it's at AS220, I've taught at the art club, RISD CE. So it's been all of these different experiences that have sort of led to this longer sort of semester hopping into RISD. I've totally forgotten your question, Jason.
No worries. Is it just, has teaching made you reevaluate what you do, whether it's just in your commercial work, in your fine artwork, things of that nature?
Oh, right. I'm not sure if it's really made me sort of reevaluate in general, but it does always just reaffirm that I really like talking with people and sharing my knowledge, and also sharing more about my work and my practice and my process. So things like teaching, we do tours at the print shop, artist talks. I think telling people about my work and kind of working through things that way is really helpful. Not that I'm yelling at the students about my practice, but just interacting with them and seeing their experience is really helpful to me.
So I have a question about RISD and
Hmm.
actually just art schools in general. And I think, I may not get a chance to ask this, especially with somebody who's in the teaching side of it. So I want to get your perspective on this because I do have a friend of mine who's a RISD grad, and we saw, and I've mentioned this on the show before a number of times. So
Hmm.
if anybody's listening, it's like, oh, here he goes again. Listen, I'm going to ask this because now I have the opportunity from the perfect person to give some perspective on it. Uh, Walked by a sign and it said, "Hey, come to this seminar. It will teach you how to do taxes as an artist," which I gotta think is probably pretty different than a normal person who is
Hmm.
doing taxes because you're a general contractor, all these different things. And my friend was like, again, alum was like, "Oh, I need to go." There was like on Tuesday at like 5, and
Hmm.
it's like, well, if you have a normal job, like if you're just working to pay the bills, which I think a lot of people do, kind of hard to get to a thing Tuesday at 5 and make time for that. And I was surprised when I was like, wait, it was free to everybody. I'm like, they didn't have a class on this in RISD or like classes on like, I guess business or like how to, like I'm guessing certain artists have managers and agents, and, how do you get those? Or like, how do you work in a more commercial field? I know you with letter press and screen printing, those are more commercial fields, but is that, is that not taught in art schools, or is there not a focus on? And if that's the case, why, considering I'm guessing that's like you have to prepare students at some point that like, hey, you're going to have to like deal with business stuff, or you may have to go, work for a corporation or or do like freelance projects, etc.
Yeah, I can't speak to every department, but the printmaking department that I graduated from had what was called a senior seminar. And the professor really went through, things like your CV, writing a cover letter, an accountant. In fact, I used her accountant um, until he passed away. So I took that advice very personally. So I think it just depends department to department. And also, too, I think something that's a common RISD experience is while you're there, the focus is often on the studio side of things. So you want to focus on learning as many techniques as you can, growing those skills as fast as you can, which means that oftentimes some of the administrative real life things sort of fall to the side. The Career Center at RISD has been really helpful to me as also a graduated person of the school in terms of, they looked at a CV and a grant app for me a few years back, which was really helpful. And those resources are all there, but I do think sometimes it's hard to balance absorbing those while you're working on away in studio and on those projects.
So, of all the different things you've done, was there a moment or maybe a number of moments where, and I think this is different for every creative person, was there a moment where like, oh, hey, I'm really doing this, like this is a career, like this is a viable career for me?
I don't know. I mean, this year has felt really busy in terms of opportunities and things that I've gotten to work on and gotten to realize. I think for me, it's always tough to sort of answer that question of what does success sort of look like, or what does it mean to have made it? And being an artist is really tricky to balance. I've got to pay the rent, I've got to pay the bills, and I've got to figure out how to buy paper or whatever for my next project. So as long as I'm able to do that, it always feels like I'm successful or being able to do what I really like to do, which is my own studio practice. So, I think for me, balancing, working at the commercial shop and teaching a little bit and keeping my practice going, hopefully will be sustainable for the next chunk of time and sort of as I figure the next things out. So because I've had such a busy summer, I'm excited to sort of try to apply for some more grants this fall and think about what my goals are for next year or the next 5 years. Put together that business plan.
Think you may have just given me the idea for we're gonna name the episode "A Lois of All Trades."
Yeah, it really does
Forget
seem like I
Jack.
was
Lois is
everywhere.
putting the
Yeah.
work in, people. Jack can go to hell.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure people are going to be tired with seeing me after this year, but it really does just feel like, I couldn't say no to anything.
Is is there any, behind the scenes work or misconceptions, or is there anything that about any of the type of work that you do that you wish the public maybe could dispel a myth, or, maybe the public just knew a little bit more or had some clarification on?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, a lot of the print work that I do does have, some technical expertise behind it. And with that does come just a lot of time. And so, it's really just, about making sure that, the thing that people have come out to see and spend time on is well worth the visit. So, I hope that people realize that I'm thinking about stuff. And even if I'm not making stuff, I'm sort of trying to think of the next one. So there's a lot of procrastination also. And that's just part of the process.
I'd agree with that. I procrastinate a lot.
It is what it is.
Yeah. I'm going to use that. Yeah. Procrastination is just part of the process.
It is. Yeah.
No,
that's
Jason.
why I need this grant. I need you to pay for me to not do anything for a while. It's hard to write that grant. I'm still working on it.
I don't know why. I'm just like picturing like Homer Simpson in like that one episode of The Simpsons where he was an artist and like he applies for a grant. It's just like, pay me money to do nothing. Yeah,
that's perfect. That's fine. I want that. And I don't want to apply for it. I just want you to give me the money.
Just give me money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Money now, please. I almost lost my train of thought. Now I'm thinking about that Simpsons episode.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to the other creatives out there, or what advice would you give to your younger self?
That implies that I'm my older self, Jason, which, I resent just a tiny bit. No, I'm just kidding. I think really that it's a long game. It's not a short game. It's about networking and meeting people and figuring out the spaces that you want to be in, and just knowing that most of that stuff won't happen overnight, and that it's really just, it's going to take a minute for things to come back to you, if that makes sense.
You were mentioning earlier, you were saying like, hey, I'm a little late to the social media. And now on top of social media, we have Web3 and the metaverse, whatever the hell that means.
Jason, I don't know what either of those things you just said
you know what? No, it doesn't matter. Neither do I. Okay. I don't think anyone does. I think that's just a buzzword. But with like new technology, new things comes new opportunities or new types of artwork. And you may have already answered the question in the sense, but is there anything technology-wise or things that are new that you're like, oh, this is a new way of putting art into the world, or this is a new medium that I could be involved in? Is there anything that you're seeing now that you're like, oh, this is interesting?
I can't think of, anything directly off the top of my head. I think social media is always a really tricky place because it seems like there's this expectation that you'll be able to sell work from it and become like the newest trend, which I don't think is really a thing. Maybe it is more on TikTok, which I just haven't quite figured. I probably won't get into that one. Instagram will probably be where I stay. And it's just so tricky because those platforms are not set up for you. They're set up to make money. And so,
set up for attention.
They're set up for attention, but also for advertising, for direct sales, for other companies. So it's just tricky to figure out how that works for my practice. And I think for me, instead of using it as an art form, I'm using it more as like an archive or newsletter in a way, because I still don't have an email newsletter, which seems like I should probably get at some point. But in terms of digital things or new technologies, a new technology to me, I'm hoping to work on creating a typeface. So with my last Wish You Were Here project, I was actually cutting letter forms from paper, from vintage posters, and then pulling those into a computer and turning them into a vector and manually moving them one by one. But I'd love to turn that into a workable typeface. So that's technology that's new to me, but not necessarily like a hologram or whatever is happening in the metaverse.
So it would be I'm only laughing just because I've you know what? I hope there's NFT bros just crying right now as they're listening to this.
I forgot that happened.
And
it's still happening, yeah. I'm not as interested in that. I'm very, very not interested in that.
I'm not against them. If you're an artist and you're doing NFTs, make your money. And if you like working on them, go for it. But at the same time, if there are days where if I hear NFT one more time, I think if my eyes roll any harder, they'll fall out of my skull.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be happy to look at my phone a lot less.
But it's funny you're mentioning, not funny, but it was interesting that you're mentioning, hey, you worked with letterpress, but now you're like, I want to turn that into a workable typeface or a font, essentially, if I'm using my terms correctly. Does that ever make you pause and wonder about, with technology and platforms, things are becoming more democratized, meaning like more artists can get their work out there into the game? Is that good? Is that bad? Does it flood the market? Like, or does it flood where there's just so much of it? Like you said, like, I want to look at my phone a little less, but at the same time, there's some great artists who are utilizing Instagram. Same with, there's some really seriously great talented artists who are utilizing NFTs, to be fair, as much as I hate hearing the word now. Does that ever make you pause and wonder, like, oh wow, things are getting more democratized and the level of access to get your artwork out there is easier than ever?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that there is sort of a direct to consumer pipeline that's developed, that's, less out of the traditional gallery or art consultant model. I just don't know sort of what the market is for those people selling work. I think people can definitely hit it big, but I don't know if that's the case for most people. And so it's sort of a thing that's interesting to watch from afar, but that doesn't seem, really accessible to me right now. I'm not making, very cute things that are, easy to ship to someone, which seem like really what Instagram is trying to show me this month, at least.
Gotten a lot of like just Samoyed dogs in my feed for
Oh.
God knows what reason. Hey, nothing against Samoyeds, by the way. They're very lovely animals. I don't know what I pressed
know what's happening.
that my entire feed now is just Samoyeds.
Yeah.
I don't know if I like looked at one and now it's like, we're gonna give you that. Like, there you go. Like, he wants Samoyeds. Just keep feeding him Samoyeds. Just keep putting that in his feed. It leads me to, one of the last questions that I have is, and I don't know if it's a myth, if it's perception, if it's a misconception, where it seems like with art and creative fields, not all of them, but a good amount of them, it's either this, like, the idea of like the it artist making a ton of money at auctions or starving artist. And and like there's not like an in between. I feel like that's a misconception. But have you seen that, experience that just from other people who may not be in the art world, where it's like you're either one extreme or the other? There's not like a middle ground.
Yeah, no, I think there's a huge middle ground, which is, I think, a large percentage of Providence. There are people like me who are working a day job and then also doing their art practice. There are people who are just working on their art practice and that's working for them. I think, coming out of art school, there was always this like, oh, who's going to be the next big person? Who's going to be the next big name from the school, or like enter the blue chip art market? But that really doesn't seem like it's that, that attainable. And for me, I'm not making work to really make a quick buck. I'm making the work that's interesting to me and that I hope other people find interesting. And if I can somehow figure out a way to make more of that work or make it more sustainable for me, then that's really the goal. I just don't think I'm ever going to buy a house off of selling prints, but that would sure be cool. So who knows?
So if this show ever becomes big and people go into the archive episodes,
yeah, there you go.
Hopefully you're
I'll cut you in.
A blue chip artist, or you sold enough prints to buy a house, and we can both look back on this episode. And if you listen to this episode now, buy more prints so Lois can buy a house.
Well, but remember what I said earlier about me then having to go in and ship you the prints. So maybe wait a minute. If everyone could just do it at once, that would be great.
Okay, if somebody can work for Lois to help make the prints, Lois needs an assistant.
I did just try to write a grant for that I didn't get. So once I get the grant funding for an assistant, I will be taking applications.
If you're looking for, I don't know what else to say here to make this better, but if you're looking for work.
I know. So.
Very last question before we get into. Oh, you're right. Maybe, hey, if you're trying to kick me off of this early,
no, I'm not kicking
you off. No, it's fine. It's fine. What is it about? I heard you mention this in another podcast that you wanted to stay in Providence because of the community. What do you think about Providence besides having RISD? makes it stand out to you? What made you want to stay? But what do you think makes it stand out in the creative world?
Yeah, I mean, from a personal standpoint, there's a huge print community in Providence. So, I mentioned AS220, but there are a lot of other shops where there's places to print. So, Bench Press, Queer Archive Work, other maker spaces like the Steel Yard. There are just so many opportunities as an artist to take classes or rent studio space or get involved. And apart from the access of those facilities, the arts community here is just really warm and welcoming. So, when somebody new moves into town, it's quick to connect to people who can help find you a studio or help connect you to so-and-so. And so, the smallness and the tight-knitness of that community is really great. And people just seem to be really open to sharing information and hopefully I can kind of pass on, that warm welcome that I received. In terms of sort of the larger question of what makes Providence the creative capital, I'm not 1,000% sure on that, I guess. There are still studio spaces that are still affordable, and I think that really keeps artists in an area. I do think it's gotten trickier here and really everywhere to figure out how to make ends meet. As an artist, when I was right out of school, I was working at a restaurant, I was working part-time at a gallery, I was working a bunch of these part-time jobs so that I could afford pretty affordable rent. But that's getting a little trickier to do these days. So I think that's really something going forward is figuring out, stable housing for artists, which AS220 does have, but figuring out more opportunities like that can keep people invested in Providence and really invested in the community.
So with that, we are at the end, and at the end of every episode, I let the guest speak about or say whatever they want. So this is an open mic, hot take, whatever you want to promote. Maybe you're trying to get that assistant hired. You can put that out there if you want. Oh, maybe, whatever you want to say, go for it. The floor is yours.
Jason, I did not have anything prepared. And I
mentioned that. Be prepared.
I mentioned that New Urban Arts Gala earlier in the episode, so that's going to be on October 14th at the Art Club. And then I really can't think. Oh, the DWI Letterpress will be at the RISD sale on October 8th. Fingers crossed. So that's a big sale on Benefit Street from 10 to 5. So come through and say hi there. But apart from that, I think people heard from me a lot this summer, and I'm really looking forward to resting and planning and prepping for next year. So that's my big pitch is just rest for October, and I'll see everyone in 2023.
Well, with that, Lois, thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Thank you for just walking us through all these different experiences. Like I said, a Lois of all trades, all the different things you do. You're a very busy person. So thank you for taking time out and, just going through all that, both the creative and the tactical. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, Jason, it was really my pleasure. And thank you so much for keeping this platform going and talking to so many different creators. You mentioned a few episodes that you have and that I've listened to and that I've loved. And I really can't wait to see who you talk to next.
Same here. And this was definitely a blast of an episode in getting more of a look into the art world. It's definitely been interesting for me and enlightening. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. And until next time, everybody, keep on creating. And that's it for this episode of the Creative Capital Show. Thank you for listening. And a special thanks goes to this episode's guest, Lois Harada. The Creative Capital Show is hosted, recorded, edited, mixed, and produced by me, Jason Sylvia. You can listen to the Creative Capital Show over at our website, creativecapitalshow.com. We're also available on Anchor FM, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all other major podcast hosting platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe. Helps the show out a lot. And be sure to follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, keep on creating.